second speaker for this afternoon is Associate Professor Eng Siew Koh. Associate Professor Eng Siew Koh is a Senior Staff Specialist in Radiation Oncology and Clinician Researcher at Liverpool Hospital and Conjoint Associate Professor at the University of New South Wales. Associate Professor Koh has many years of experience in the care of brain and spinal tumour patients, clinical trials and research. Associate Professor Koh is the current chair of COGNO, the Cooperative Trials Group for Neuro-Oncology, which is the National Brain Tumour Trials Network, and she has been a key investigator in a broad portfolio of successful Australian and international brain cancer trials spanning interventions, novel imaging, and supportive care. She's passionate about advancing outcomes for all those affected by brain cancer. And Associate Professor Koh will be speaking to us about clinical trials and COGNO. Please welcome Associate Professor Koh.
Thanks so much for a wonderful introduction, and it's really a pleasure to spend time with everyone today. And I must say, I give a lot of presentations in Australia and overseas, and this is certainly one of my favourites. It's really wonderful to have that direct interaction with patients and families and people involved in the brain tumour community, and it really reminds me of why I continue to do what I do. So thank you so much for this opportunity. My brief in 10 minutes is to actually talk broadly about clinical trials. And in fact, this morning's session set us up really nicely and covered quite a lot of ground already. So I'm going to work through this fairly promptly. So really three key questions, and we actually opened the discussion and in the Q&A session already touching and the audience asked these questions. What is it that makes brain tumours and spinal tumours trials different? What are the particularly unique challenges in delivering research in this area? I'm going to give you some examples of the Australian trial landscape and how we connect to our colleagues internationally. And just sum up where I think we are in future directions. I actually think we're in a really good place, a much better place, and I want to show you some examples of that. It's a very wide brief, so I'm just going to pick some key trials where Australia's certainly led and contributed to. So just to provide a bit of context when we talk about clinical trials, and you might be aware of this, but when we talk about trials, we generally have a preclinical phase, and then we have 4 phases of trials conducted in humans. So the preclinical studies usually relate to laboratory-based studies, not in humans. They may be done using animal experiments, really to look at the science and proof of concept before they are then potentially moved to the phase 1 setting. So phase 1 trials in humans are looking specifically at the questions of safety. So how safe is this particular drug or this intervention? Does it work? Is it feasible to deliver safely in humans? And then we go to the phase 2 setting where it's generally a slightly larger size of patients involved in that study, where again the questions relate to safety in a large group of patients, but also dosing of that particular drug or intervention, monitoring for side effects, and obviously looking for signals, is this particular intervention effective? And then finally we have this larger phase 3 trial, again in a larger group of patients, confirming the effectiveness and asking, is the particular intervention effective? And then we have this process where a drug might be released onto market, and there might be a phase 4 post-marketing type setting. So with that sort of background, I guess the question that perhaps this audience together is asking, well, how do I know in Australia I'm diagnosed with this, with a brain tumour, am I getting the best treatment? And I think that's a very valid question. I think this is data that my colleague Ben Kong and others from the COGNO team have published. And interestingly, when we look at the actual statistics by country, recognising, for example, that in the United States they have over 300 million people, and Australia has less than a tenth of that size. But per capita, by population, I think this graph is telling us that actually Australia does have trial options, and patients do have access to a variety of trials, both phase 1, 2 and 3, and that proportionally I actually think that Australia does relatively well in being able to bring forward and offer trials to our patients looking at particular different interventions. But of course, we still have quite a way to grow and develop. We already touched on this morning, the question, what is it that's unique about brain tumours and spinal tumours? What is it that makes the trial setting quite challenging? And I think we touched on the fact that these are rare tumours, so the absolute numbers of cases are small. It's therefore hard to design trials because you don't have 10,000 patients, you only might have 200. And obviously those cases they're rare, and so it takes a long time to recruit a certain number of patients potentially. We talked this morning about the biology, that the biology of different tumours is quite broad and different, and we know that when patients are initially diagnosed, the tumour can be quite different at recurrence biologically. We talked about the blood-brain barrier that presents a natural barrier to actually the drugs penetrating into the area that they need to go. And we talked also about some of the ecosystem for research in Australia, where we have limited access to government funding, philanthropic funding, but certainly in the last 5+ years that has improved compared to what we were like 10 years ago. So I think all these elements woven together make it a challenging environment. Related to that same publication, when we did a horizon scan across brain cancer trials in Australia and internationally, we do recognise that we need to look at all phase trials, particularly the early phase trials where they're done as proof of principle interventions. We already touched on this morning about the relative lack of funding, both within Australia and internationally. It is improving, but we need funding to be able to attract the brightest minds to work on research and to deliver well-designed trials and to read them out. And so this is really a scoping paper asking ourselves, what are the strategies, what do we need to move in Australia to see an active and engaged research community? So I think we've heard already today about Cogno, and it's my honour to be able to chair Cogno for the last 3 years and going forward. And really our mission is very simple, and it really is to be a key partner in delivering better outcomes for our patients and all of those affected carers and the broader community through clinical trials research. And I think in Australia we work in an environment where we understand the value of research, we understand clinical trials, what it adds, how it will push the boundaries. It is the main vehicle that we can use to actually improve outcomes. And I must say, Cogno is established in 2007. Liz was one of the founding members, and it contains health professionals, clinicians, researchers, but importantly consumers. So we certainly have quite a large group of consumer members, and for those who'd like to learn more, we'd love you to have a look. And you can sign up. Membership is free. It's very simple, and it connects you to our community. So this is really a summary slide. It's one slide that probably demonstrates 15 years of work, and I know some of our team are actually sitting here in the audience today. This is just a snapshot of some of the Cogno trials that have been successfully delivered in the last 15 years, and so I'll just spend a few moments on them, but happy to talk about them after and share more information. It basically shows that Cogno in the last 15 or so years has successfully led Australian-led trials, but also collaborated with our partners internationally, particularly our European colleagues and those in North America. The Nutmeg trial was in glioblastoma in adults in elderly patients, 65 and up, looking at the role of immunotherapy in addition to standard of care radiation and temozolomide chemotherapy. That is now closed and published. The results are published. We have the Catnon trial, which is a very successful trial. Annette spoke about that, which was in conjunction with our European colleagues. Australia contributed very strongly to that trial. It's read out and has certainly changed practice around the world. We have the Loomis trial, which I'll speak about in a moment. We had an initial pilot study in a small group of patients to demonstrate proof of principle. That was in lower grade 2 and 3 glioma. And we have the Virtue study, which is an adult glioblastoma looking at the role of a PARP inhibitor. It was a phase 2 trial in 125 patients, which is now closed and published. So really, I think it's not so much to focus on the detail, but really to demonstrate that through organisations like Cogno and with partners, especially our community partners, BTAA, and the whole Australian community, Australia can certainly help contribute and be part of the answer when it comes to improving outcomes for our patients. I think one of our crowning achievements in Cogno, in my view, is the MAGMA trial. And I say that because this is the largest glioblastoma trial that I've seen in Australia, led by a cooperative trials group. It's what we call an investigator-initiated study, and it's the largest in that we had 28 hospitals across the country, and I'll show you a map on the next slide, that contributed, especially patients in regional settings, which we're really proud about, that we could be able to bring these kind of trials to patients and they could actively contribute. The MAGMA trial essentially was asking two pragmatic questions. What's the role of early commencement of temozolomide chemotherapy before the radiation commences? As people probably know, standard of care is surgery, recovery period, radiation, chemo starting together. The first question, question one, was what is the added value of commencing temozolomide at least 1, if not 2 weeks before the radiation comes in? And the second pragmatic question is, why are we stopping at 6 months? Is there any value to ongoing temozolomide beyond 6 months? So I don't have the answer. I promise you I don't have it yet. We've closed the study last July and we're just waiting for patients in follow-up and ready to read out that study in due course. But we had 338 patients recruited across the country, 28 sites, and you'll see them. So essentially every state and jurisdiction across the country recruited to that study, I think bar the Northern Territory. So we're really proud of that. And through the pandemic, which is pretty amazing for a brain cancer trial, we delivered that trial as a community. So I'm really proud of what we've done with MAGMA and look forward to reading out the results. Turning to the LUMOS 2 trial, I think Annette spoke about this trial briefly this morning. This is a really interesting trial, and it's interesting from many perspectives, and we've touched on it a little this morning. So the LUMOS 2 trial is an active trial. It is rolling out across Australia at the moment. We have 12 Australian centres involved in this study. This is a trial for patients with recurrent lower grade glioma, grade 2 and 3, and it's an interventional trial. And it's a study whereby patients come into the trial, they have redo surgery, so we have fresh tissue on the current tumour, so we can profile that tumour through CASP, which was what, again, a partner we spoke about this morning. And then we look at that tumour and we say, is there any mutation that can be targeted? If there is, those patients are assigned to various arms. And so I won't labour the details on this slide, but we actually have 4 arms that are funded through competitive grant funding, and we are rolling them out. And even if after the profiling, there's no particular obvious targetable mutation, patients will still go on study and receive a novel intervention. So I think the design aspects of this study are interesting because everyone who comes onto study and is eligible receives a novel intervention. We have fresh tissue, so we know that that is the accurate profiling of that particular tumour at that point in time, and everyone receives an intervention. And the exciting part about this study especially is that our Canadian colleagues heard about this trial, were very keen to be involved, secured their own funding, and will be rolling this study out across Canada. And so this will be the first Cogno-led study that's gone international. And so we are really proud to see Canada come on board and be part of this effort. I think the important point that I think I made in the panel is that it's really important that we can engage with our industry colleagues, with the pharmaceutical companies. This is a niche area. The patients involved, it's a rare caseload of patients affected. It's really important that we can engage strongly with different pharmaceutical companies, both in Australia and internationally, especially for an umbrella trial like LUMOS. And we are pushing hard. We've submitted a grant for Arm 5, and we're looking for ideas for Arm 6 and 7. So bring it on is what I say. I think once we've developed the platform, it becomes an exciting endeavour in terms of adding new arms on and new interventions. I just want to pivot to the FIG trial. Michael Back alluded to this trial this morning. I have the honour of leading this study, co-leading it across Australia. It will be the largest study in the world looking at the role of FET-PET in glioblastoma. It is a multi-centre study with 11 hospitals across Australia, asking the question, what value add does FET-PET scanning have in managing patients with glioblastoma, both in terms of targeting the radiation field, which Michael Back spoke to this morning, but also in helping us differentiate pseudo versus true progression. We have 188 patients by yesterday's count on study. We're heading towards 210, so we'll be completing the study in the coming months, and we look forward to reading it out. And so I'm very excited because through the experience with the FIG trial, we've been able to upskill 11 hospitals across the country, where most hospitals had very little experience in FET-PET. So hopefully when we read out the results of the study, and if we can prove the added role of FET-PET, we will be positioned well to be able to roll out this imaging modality across Australia and actually, hopefully internationally, with the results of the FIG trial. I just wanted to mention the Rome study. So I think that Cogno is focused on brain tumours, be they malignant brain tumours, glioma, metastatic brain tumours, but also benign tumours like meningioma. This is actually a TROG study run by Trans-Tasman, the Radiation Oncology Research Group across Australia and New Zealand. And this is looking at the question of, should we observe or should we give upfront radiation in patients with what we call atypical or grade 2 intermediate meningioma. And Australia contributed very well to that study, and the results are still pending. So I just wanted to really just share that, across the whole spectrum of brain tumour research, Australia is certainly leading and contributing to that effort. Annette mentioned the GBM Agile trial. GBM Agile is a study that's currently opened across 4 centres in Australia. I think the interesting thing, the design aspect of GBM Agile is that, as I mentioned before, it's this really interesting, what we call an adaptive design. So rather than have a trial that opens and closes over a number of years with one intervention, the idea is that this study can adapt over time, so that if there's a signal, the intervention or that arm would continue on that intervention. If there's no signal, that arm would close. And so the idea is that it's a rolling, in a sense, platform that continuously brings in new drugs, new therapies and interventions in both the newly diagnosed setting and in the recurrent setting. So that study is open in Australia at a number of sites, and so we look forward to hearing with interest as to the outcomes of how GBM Agile reads out over time. I think just in the last couple of slides to say that we are also involved in other vaccine trials. Annette spoke about some of them today. Liz Hovey and I, and with colleagues, are working on the Interrogate study, which is a CMV peptide vaccine study, which we will be recruiting to from Scientia, based at Randwick in the eastern suburbs, and also at Liverpool with us in southwest Sydney. And again, it's about, I think, in novel, well-designed studies, proof of principle, and we look forward to recruiting to this study, and again, very much an Australian, together with our US colleagues, bring forth this particular study. And so I think in the last slide or so, I hope I've shared with you just over a few minutes the fact that I think Australia is well connected to our colleagues in Europe, North America, Canada, UK and other countries. That global connectivity is really important, particularly in a rare tumour setting. But I think we've also demonstrated that Australia can lead very strong, well-designed trials in its own right and really lead the effort scientifically to these particular trials and outcomes. And so really, in summary, I think we are making strong continued progress in trials. I think really important is the tissue, both at initial diagnosis and at recurrence. There's a lot of very bright minds in Australia, a very strong science community, trials community, everyone in their lane working together. I think the beauty of Australia is we're small enough, but we're big enough. And by that I mean we are well connected, we all know each other, we can pick up the phone, and we are essentially a family working together to really join efforts to really make a difference. And I think I really just want to take a moment to say the number one partner is our patients, you, their carers, without whom, the sacrifice, their desire to contribute to being part of the answer is just incredibly valid and important. So I wanted just to acknowledge that. So happy to take any questions, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Sue. Any questions? Maybe we can have time for one. We'll also have some Q&A at the end.
Very quick question. The Lumus, when you go on the infusion, how long are you on it for?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. Great question. So you're right, every arm is different because it's a different intervention. So the protocol will obviously specify the duration of therapy, and obviously we'll be doing MRI follow-up at each, quite frequent intervals. So we need to make sure that patients are stable, they're responding, we know what their disease response is. So the duration of therapy will also be determined on how people are responding to that therapy.